He says, "Hello, TrainerRoad coaches. Thank you all for helping making me a better cyclist and for making a product and service that has such a positive impact on people." He says, "I always hear about the ideal recovery ratio of 4 units of carbs to 1 unit of protein. This is what a lot of people talk about in a traditional recovery shake, right, Amber?" And he says, "You usually take this shortly after a workout." Now, Amber spoke recently, and it has been covered many times, about how to fuel workouts with carbs before and during. I typically work out early and attempt to make up the calorie deficit that he has during as opposed to before the workout, and typically max out my consumption at about 90 grams of carbs per hour. I understand that it may not be an actual max, but this is my max now. So does it still make sense to maintain the carb protein ratio if I've already loaded up with carbs? So this question, Amber, gets to like a big thing that we've talked about with this minimum effective dose with carbs. And we as a people, I'm saying people in general, not us. We are champions of the opposite, but we as a people are obsessed with finding the minimum effective dose of carbs. Like, well, because the assumption carbs make you fat. So what's the absolute minimum amount that I can take in with still being able to get by? And it's a problem, and it's making you slower if you're hearing this and you have that perspective. So hopefully what we can cover with this one is the opposite of that and try to inform why you actually want to take on more carbohydrate. Nate, your notes are first on this one. Do we want to go to that, or do we want to just toss it to Amber?
Mine are real quick, and then we can go into way deep with Amber. In general, what they've seen is it's like your daily carb intake. Amber's going to talk about the benefits of the recovery shake too. But what they've seen in general is if you're doing more than 2.5 hours of aerobic activity a day, your performance increases up to 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight a day. So these are like even like marathon runners, like Kenyans who are doing 120 miles a week or something crazy like that. They don't increase their performance after 10. So it looks like there's some upper limit of 10 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbs. If you're doing less, probably around 6 grams per kilogram of body weight is optimal to increase performance. That 6 grams per kilogram body weight is way more, I bet you, than you're thinking. And in my experience, doing my own Fitness Pal stuff, is that the fat intake is if you eat anything that's like you didn't make yourself, even if you make it yourself, the fat is so easy to get, and then it's really hard to hit your caloric target and hit that 6 grams. So even 6 grams per kilogram body weight is probably more than most of you are doing for your regular, 90 minutes a day, an hour a day, stuff like that.
Before we hand it over to Amber, I want to emphasize one point that you said, Nate. It wasn't that eating 8 to 10 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight avoided bonking by a certain percentage. It's that 8 to 10 grams of carbs per kilogram, you see improvement as you eat more all the way up until that point, improvement in performance. So you actually are faster, you're stronger, you're outputting more work as a result of that, right?
That's a huge point, is that people are like, they'll say, I don't need it because I'm not bonking, therefore I should get whatever the amount is that I'm just over that line is my target line, and that's the thing, because I don't want to get fat. And I think what's super interesting, I don't know if I've said this in the podcast before, but they've done studies where they put people in these metabolic changers where they measure all the gas in and out. They measure the stool, like everything that comes out from the toilet. They have researchers and they create very specific food to be able to understand how many calories you're getting. And they keep people in these chambers for a long time. Like I want to say 14 days or more, and it's just bored in there. So they can measure how much they're actually moving, and by measuring how much they're breathing out, they can measure how many calories they're burning and everything that's coming out of their body. They give people high carb diet or high fat diet, right? Because they want to see, because people say, hey, carbs make you fat. In the study that I'm thinking of, which I don't have a link to, it's on the Science of Stronger by Science podcast. We can find it later.
And we'll put it in after this episode in the forums.
You're going to make me look for it. Just listen to the Science by Stronger podcast, or Stronger by Science podcast. That's an excellent podcast for all this sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But they, I lost my train of thought. Concussion. Oh yeah. So afterwards, actually the group that had high carb lost a little more body fat than the group that was high fat for the same calories, but it wasn't enough to be statistically significant. So basically, for science fact, It was just calories in, calories out. They did not, their weight didn't change and their body composition didn't change between the two diets.
Groups.
And now you would think that, oh, that's because it doesn't make sense if you think that carbs make you fat and it makes it so you cannot burn fat as soon as you're eating carbs. It just like blows your mind. There's some researchers on that Stronger by Science that will do a much better job of explaining that than I will. But if you know that that's the outcome, it's so, it might change the way you think about nutrition, especially inside of cycling, that carbs actually don't make you fat.
Yeah. Amber, maybe we want to start off with addressing the term topped off. And I'm using quotes here if you're listening on the podcast. And then we can get into everything else here. Because topped off is like a big assumption where it's like, well, I just had a pancake, so I'm topped off. Or like I took in 90 grams of carbs, so I'm topped off. What is topped off? Like, and maybe that's probably a good point to address before we get into the specifics.
Yeah, so there's probably a couple different ways of thinking about that, but primarily you're thinking about in terms of your training, your glycogen stores. So that would be liver glycogen, but also muscle glycogen. And then in terms of this particular question, taking in carbohydrate during your workout, so staying ahead, quote unquote, on your energy needs, right? So are you taking in enough, quote unquote, are you taking in enough to keep up with the energy demands and what's actually being burned? So there's the topped off in terms of glycogen storage, and then also staying ahead on the energy demands of the actual workout that you're doing. And yeah, we'll get into that a little bit, but that's probably what this question is referring to. Or if somebody was going to talk about being quote unquote topped off on carbs, those would be sort of the factors that we're considering. And
it's super tough to ever actually be topped off, especially post-workout. I've never been topped off post-workout. And I just did a ride where I fueled with 120 grams of carbs per hour. I still probably wasn't topped off. Like it's right. Really tough to be topped off. That's the thing. So yes.
Days of no activity and lots of carbs.
Uncomfortable process,
low
honestly.
Activity.
Yeah. So don't think you're topped off if you're not. Don't think that you've reached a point where you don't need to take anything else in.
Right. So while we're doing definitions, let me do a couple caveats as we talk about this. Let's be real specific here. So I'm going to restrict this discussion to post-workout intake. Now, what Nate was saying about taking in 6 to 10 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight over the course of the day, that's actually a really key thing, because what the current research is suggesting is that the two most important factors to improving your performance and getting faster are the training stimulus and how well you are consuming nutrition over the course of the whole day to meet your energy demands. So that's the most important thing. Now, if we want to get a little bit better than that, we can look at your nutrition before, during, and after your workout. And there's a really, really nice review paper that we'll link here. It's by Arendt et al., and it's a 2020 review of nutrient timing specifically. But this is a direct quote from the paper. And they say, in the context of sports nutrition for optimizing performance and recovery, which is what we want to do, the issue of consuming nutrients should not be separated into before, during, or after, but should be combined as before, during, and after. And I think this is getting to the crux of the question here. So when we talk about this today, we're talking about post-workout intake. I'm going to talk about carbohydrate and protein. We're not going to get into the weeds on type of protein, type of carbohydrate. We're going to kind of keep this at a high level. And then this is all applicable to healthy exercising adults. Okay. So it may not apply in the same way to physiology where there's metabolic disorder or something like that. But when we're talking about healthy exercising adults, this is sort of the framework that we're going to use to talk about this today. So I've definitely been a big fan of the 4-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio in the post-workout recovery. And the reason that I'm a fan of that is because it stacks the deck in your favor. The majority of studies that look at using a combination of carbohydrate and protein for recovery use a 4-to-1 ratio. And many of these studies show an increase in performance and really no performance detriment. And that's key. Is this optimal? Is it ideal? Who knows? And honestly, that's the honest answer. No one really knows. So if I've ever used the word optimal or ideal, I apologize for that, because that's not a precise use of the language and it's not exactly accurate. The idea that we could actually identify an ideal or optimal ratio is almost impossible. There's just so many different factors: individual physiology, type, duration, intensity of exercise, type of carbohydrate, type of protein. there are just so many factors involved that it makes it almost kind of ridiculous to think that we could come up with a silver bullet ratio that's going to apply across the board. But let's talk about why carbohydrate and protein are effective. So there's a few concepts at play here in terms of this question. And the idea that what you're taking in during your workout as carbohydrate would top you off and serve the same function as a carbohydrate that you would take after your workout is not quite right. So the timing effect here is a really important component. The effect of the carbohydrate that you take in during exercise is going to have a different effect than what you take in immediately after or long after your workout. And that's because hormones. The hormones that are upregulated during exercise are really different than the ones that are going to be upregulated at rest, and how they're interacting is going to be really different. And that's going to determine the effect of the carbohydrate that you're taking in at that time. So the carbohydrate you're taking in during is really serving the purpose of trying to catch up on the energy and fuel consumption, because you're in a catabolic state. This is the state where you're breaking things down, you're consuming, you're burning fuel, you're taking big molecules, making them smaller, burning them up to fuel the effort that you're putting out for your workout. The carbohydrate after is for rebuilding those energy and fuel stores. So this is your anabolic state. So instead of breaking things down and consuming, you are putting them together and building to replenish those stores. Another quote from this Arendt et al. Review article, which is a great one, again, if you want to read that on your own. The quote is, post-exercise carbohydrate and protein intake have the ability to increase blood glucose levels, decrease cortisol, and increase substrate availability, thus amplifying the body's shift from a catabolic to a more anabolic state. And that's really the key here, is you're shifting from catabolic and sympathetic to anabolic and parasympathetic. And that's really what the recovery shake is about. Yeah, Jonathan.
So I just want to recap something that Amber's saying here. In other words, there are different reasons for taking in carbohydrate while you're training and after. So they're not mutually exclusive. They are not the same as well. It's not like you can do one to then make up for a lack with the other, but there's reasons to take in carbohydrate that are unique for each one of those scenarios. Is that correct, Amber?
Yeah. And I think Nate wanted to jump in too.
Yeah. I would want to say, we're going to beat this point in the ground 3 times. What you're saying is body rebuild by doing this. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're doing. And it's going to switch you into a state to be able to rebuild. That's the goal. Exactly.
Now here on this podcast, we want to make you faster. So what we're really interested in are the performance outcomes. And there is a nice meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials that looked at, and this is a 2020 meta-analysis. We'll link this one as well. But they looked at studies that were trying to examine the difference between carbohydrate only versus carbohydrate plus protein. And they looked at intake during and after exercise. They looked at effects on time to exhaustion and effects on time trial performance. And we're looking at this carbohydrate versus carbohydrate plus protein. So most of the studies that they found used a 4-to-1 ratio. By far, like the vast majority used a 4-to-1 ratio. The next most common ratio was a 3-to-1 ratio, and then there were some smaller ones in there as well. When they looked at isocaloric intake, which is you use the exact same amount of calories, but in one case it's 100% carbohydrate, and in the other case it's carbohydrate and protein, there was no difference, no significant difference in the efficacy. So they're about the same. What they did find was carbohydrate plus protein, not isocaloric, but carbohydrate plus protein showed a significant increase in time to exhaustion in instances where the athletes had a greater than 8-hour recovery window. So the biggest effect was seen when the recovery window was pretty long, as opposed to a shorter 4-hour recovery window. And that's the case for most athletes who are training once a day. And even training daily, that's going to be kind of what your recovery window is. And again, time to exhaustion is not the best metric. And the authors were really good in this meta-analysis about going through and detailing all of the differences across these studies, because there are different experimental protocols, different types of carbohydrate, different types of protein. So all of this we need to take with a big grain of salt. But if we're just looking for general trends and what the very rich body of research is kind of pointing us to, the take-home message is that carbohydrate plus protein is at least as effective as carbohydrate only. It might be more effective, and it's definitely not less effective, which means that adding protein to your carbohydrate is a pretty good bet, right? Nate, you talk a lot about asymmetric risk here. I think this is a pretty good example.
Yeah. Like what's the downside? The downside is it's the extra calories, right? And 20 grams of protein, what is that times 4 would be 80, 20, 40, 60, 80 calories, right? Am I doing this right? Right?
Yep.
It's not much. It's like the 80 calories is not much food. So I wouldn't even worry about that. And that's very easy to remove 80 calories later in the day. So why not do it?
And what's interesting is a lot of the studies that are looking at performance, the more intake you have after your workout, the better the performance increase. So when they were looking at the isocaloric studies, for example, what showed the biggest difference was more calories equaled better performance. And so it wasn't just about the carbohydrate and protein versus carbohydrate only, but also the amount of energy that you're taking in to replenish your energy stores. That's really key here. So I would say even like the quote unquote extra calories, like that's not even a bad thing. There's just not really a downside here.
Yeah. And when you look at the potential upside, it's just so high, right? And that's the potential upside is your workouts are more successful. You don't feel run down so that your workout makes you unable for the rest of the things that you need to do that day. You're able to recover better. There's just so many upsides. So, yeah.
Right. And the thing about this stuff, especially nutritional science, is there are so many unknowns. There are so many mechanistic pathways that we just don't understand because it's really, really hard to study them, especially in human beings. And so we're operating in we're just operating in the middle of a lot of uncertainty is what it comes down to. And so again, part of why we make this recommendation is, okay, in the face of all of this uncertainty, what are the things that, what are the trends that we see that we can capitalize on to stack the deck in your favor? And that's really what we're trying to do. But we can look at a few kind of mechanistic pathways. There's a lot of different recovery pathways. There's 3 primary ones that are investigated in the literature. These likely contribute to improved performance, but the explicit mechanisms by which that they might do so are really unclear. So this is not to say that these are the reasons, but it's interesting to think about. And the 3 things that I'm going to talk about quickly are glycogen. We want to replenish this. Muscle protein breakdown. We want to reduce this, right? Because if you're breaking down proteins, what we want to do is we want to protect and conserve the lean mass that you work so hard to build, right? So we don't want to break that down. And then the last one is muscle protein synthesis. So avoiding breakdown is one thing, but actually synthesizing new muscle is a totally different pathway. So those are the 3 things that we're looking for with recovery. And then we'll look at glycogen first. So the obvious protagonist here is carbohydrate. Glycogen is carbohydrate, so taking carbohydrate makes sense. One of the things that has long been in the literature that's being called a little bit more into question now is what's called the anabolic window. We've talked about this. This is where immediately following your workout, you have an upregulation of what's called GLUT4 transporters. And what these do is they just make your muscles, they increase your muscles' ability to take in glucose and replenish muscle glycogen stores. So what the science is saying now is we kind of used to look at this as like, oh, you've got to hit that window or else. But what the science is showing us now is that little window, and this is the analogy the authors use in the paper, it might actually be like this huge gaping garage door. And so that window it's not required. You don't have to hit it. But if you do hit it with carbohydrate intake, the replenishment of glycogen will be faster. You can achieve the same end by doing what Nate said and having high levels of carbohydrate consistently throughout the rest of your day. You'll likely replenish your glycogen stores by the next day. But if you just hit it right after that workout, then it's kind of like an insurance policy. You know it's going to replenish fast, and then you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, go ahead.
It's do both, right? Because you're not going to get the 6 grams per carbs with just your one. That would be a heck of a recovery shake. You're going to have diarrhea for days. Don't. So that's doing both. I think is an excellent to maximize performance. We talked about the previous question about low volume maximizing it. Do both of those things, right? And that could get your performance even further on the same volume, which for all of us, everyone's like probably time strapped on this, listening to this podcast.
Exactly.
What an amazing way to make every minute you put into training to get more out of it. And I think that's like the goal for all of us.
Right, exactly. So this was one of the interesting things that they looked at was if you're not going to hit that window, what's another way to replenish and maximize the glycogen resynthesis? And the protocol that is sort of the consensus based on this review is to have 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per hour carbohydrate within 2 hours of your workout, then every 15 to 30 minutes for 4 to 6 hours. Like if you really want to maximize that resynthesis, this is the protocol that they recommend. And let's be honest, this is not really conducive to most people's normal lives. Like I don't know about you, but some people work out in the evening and they might not even have 6 hours before they're going to go to bed, let alone the time to set an alarm, get up, have some carbohydrate every 15 minutes. It's just not practical. So this is a good example of where what we see in the lab as being maximized or potentially optimal isn't necessarily applicable or realistic for real life application. And one of the interesting things to note in this paper too is they mentioned that the timed ingestion of post-exercise carbohydrate, and this is a direct quote, has never been shown to have negative implications on performance. So again, there's no downside to this, and you can only stack the deck in your favor with this. And capitalizing on that window, while it's not essential or required, it's really efficient. And it's a great opportunity to get that energy replenished in a short amount of time without having to have some kind of a carbohydrate drip or IV for the rest of the day.
I was just going to say, Amber, this is like stage races. Nate, I'm thinking back to Valley of the Sun when we did that one with Ryan Standish and Keegan Swenson, drink. And they are really good at this. They just didn't stop eating. Like they had that carbohydrate drip, so to speak, going I wonder what Nate's drinking. It's not normally colored. It's just coffee, I assume.
Nope. Tart cherry juice.
Oh, like gains. Duh. What else would it be?
That's a bad boss thing to say. Duh.
Sorry.
That's we're friends. That's we're peers. That's how I
exactly. Yeah. But but they're really good at that. I'm sure you saw that too, Amber. Like with whether it's pro athletes, anything else, they're really good at kind of attaching that drip cart to them of carbs in the sense that they're constantly taking in food afterward and just making sure they do that. It's one of the things that separates athletes like this. It makes them better.
Remember,
for sure. And
I'm sorry, I just got to say this. Remember way back in the day, carb trickle? My problem with that was I did not, it wasn't big enough. I was keeping it too small. But anyways, that's what it harkens back to. Remember, I was like, I want to eat like a bunch of carbs a little bit all day long to try to slowly feed back my my glycogen post workout. Mm-hmm. Now there's finally like at least somebody said science around it. I don't know.
Amber, I guess that covers the glycogen side of, or the carbohydrate side of things. What about protein plus carbohydrate?
Right. So again, we kind of said carbohydrate, likely protagonist for glycogen, but what about protein? And protein actually has a really positive effect on glycogen resynthesis. And we know this because it's been shown to increase muscle glycogen synthesis. And this is likely due to an increase in insulin secretion because protein, the presence of protein actually helps trigger an insulin response. And this likely helps the muscles be able to take up that carbohydrate to resynthesize glycogen. So again, to that question, how much protein? Seems that there's some consensus around about 0.4 grams per kilogram per hour plus carbohydrate. It may stimulate glycogen synthesis more than carbohydrate alone, especially if the carbohydrate intake is low. And by that, they mean less than about 1 gram to 1.2 grams per kilogram per hour. And again, this is just for muscle glycogen. So adding protein might help. It's not going to hurt. It's not going to reduce the efficacy of the carbohydrate that you're going to take in, and it might help. And so why not is really what it comes down to. And that's really, and I do think that that's interesting, right? Because you sort of think about like the protein would be for your muscle and the lean mass, and the carbohydrate would be for the glycogen, but they both work synergistically to resynthesize glycogen. And that brings us to muscle protein breakdown. And again, this is the one that we want to reduce. We want to reduce the breakdown. So muscle damage and glycogen depletion both contribute to protein breakdown. So we know this, your muscles, you're using your muscles, there's micro damage, that's going to happen. But the other thing that causes the protein breakdown is glycogen depletion. Because if you deplete a lot of glycogen and you don't have protein and carbohydrate coming in, your body is going to find existing protein to break down in order to make new glycogen. So surprisingly, carbohydrate intake post-exercise decreases muscle protein breakdown. So carbohydrate alone protects your lean mass. Win, right? This is good. But it doesn't have any effect on muscle protein synthesis. So carbohydrate can protect existing lean mass, but it's not going to help you build new lean mass. This is also likely related to insulin. Protein also helps reduce muscle protein breakdown. And protein in particular, because carbohydrate can't promote muscle protein synthesis, the protein is the key when you want to make new lean muscle. And that's brings us to the muscle protein synthesis. So carbohydrate does nothing for this. You need protein to increase this. The need for protein post-exercise to trigger muscle protein synthesis is affirmed by the International Society of Sports Nutrition. They have a position statement from 2017. We can link that one too. But this is absolutely critical if you want to promote muscle protein synthesis, making new muscles. So what's the optimal amount of protein for muscle protein synthesis? Who knows? That's really what it comes down to. One study showed that 20 grams of high quality fast absorbing protein increased muscle protein synthesis after resistance and high intensity aerobic training. This wasn't normalized by weight, and other studies have shown that higher doses of protein can elicit higher muscle protein synthesis in some cases. So as far as a minimum effective dose, no idea. As far as optimal, no idea. But we do know that the presence of protein is going to help with muscle protein synthesis. We know it's going to help preserve lean mass by reducing muscle protein breakdown, and it's going to help with the glycogen repletion. So these are all good things. So bringing this back full circle, why would we recommend 4-to-1 post-workout recovery drink? Most of the research that's been done on this uses 4-to-1. Many of those studies show positive performance outcomes, which is all we really care about here. And it's not going to hurt, right? There's no downside. It's like insurance. Having a recovery drink right after every workout, you're taking advantage of that window of opportunity. It's not necessary, but it's like a little insurance plan. You know you've hit that. You know you put in the carbohydrate and protein to trigger those recovery systems, so that's all good. Again, this is about signaling. You want to train your body to shift from catabolic to anabolic. You want to train your body to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic, and Nate already nailed this one, but it's also kind of a psychological routine that signals you to be like, okay, body, we did the work. It's time to rest and digest and rebuild. And that routine and even the flavor, the experience of having the shake every workout, it creates a nice Pavlovian response for your body to be like, okay, time to chill, rebuild, recover. And then lastly, getting back to what we touched on, which is the lab versus practical real life application. What we want to do is build habits, right? So in this case, by creating kind of a standard post-workout recovery drink for yourself, you can reap 90% of the gains. I made up that number for the record, but you can reap most of the gains for a fraction of the effort, right? There's very low cognitive load. You're doing the same thing after every workout. There's no downside. There's a potentially huge upside. And that's as opposed to say, like, imagine in some amazing ideal world, you could actually discover the theoretical optimum of carbohydrate to protein ratio for every single workout. And right, it would be different for every single workout and different for every single day, depending on the context of what was going on in your life. And even if you could actually titrate it perfectly to that perfect optimal amount after every single workout, oh my gosh, how much extra effort is that? And really, how much marginal gain are you going to get from that? Like, is it, would that actually be worth it? Yeah, Jonathan.
This is why we recommend, like, when measuring food and going through that, doing it occasionally, but not, if it's causing so much stress, having to measure everything all the time and running that can defeat a lot of the purposes that you're really going for, which is make yourself an athlete that can respond better to training, right? It can be pretty tough if it overwhelms you. Nate, I see you smiling like you have a cheeky thing to say.
Alex Weil just opened a spreadsheet. And he's like, I can figure this out. Like, let's get this
for
in
sure.
here.
And that's just the thing. For some people, it's all
fun.
part of the process, and it's fun, and it's a positive thing for them. And for others, it's not. So it's really important that you recognize where you're at on that. One thing that I've done with this, sorry, Nate, again, sorry.
Oh, I'm just going to say, for 99.99% of people is a bad idea. There's a certain personality where getting the exact, like, not even if it's right, just trying to figure it out is extremely fun. And if you're not getting extreme fun out of it, like, ooh, this is really fun to make this spreadsheet and do all these things, don't try to do it, because it's more harm than good, to what Amber's point is.
A part of this too is, I think, finding something that you enjoy. Like you mentioned, Amber, like the taste of the drink can be like a good signal, and one that you enjoy. And I actually kind of want to take a quick interlude here and just have each one of us share if we have, whether it's a recovery drink or recovery meal that we really prefer, like the one that we go to if we could. Oftentimes my training is just before dinner. So I usually end up going right into dinner. And, but recently I've actually changed it up, and I've been drinking the recovery drink, then having dinner thereafter. The recovery drink that I have landed on, it's one that I've tried a bunch of different ones, and I've come back to this one. It's just the basic Cliff recovery chocolate one. It's just delicious. I love it. It tastes like a chocolate drink, and I'm okay with giving myself a full chocolate drink rather than going for something that is, I guess, technically trying to find a minimum effective dose with carbs and doesn't taste as good. So, but that's like my go-to is Cliff's recovery one. Pete, what do you have?
I'm in this strange, I've been doing non-dairy proteins for a while. And so trying to find the best one that I like and enjoy and makes me feel like I'm rewarding myself at the end. Just like you said, like there's something to be said for doing a lot of work and then giving yourself a reward. It makes me very happy. So I've been trying a lot of different ones, and I pretty much always add maple syrup and some sort of milk to it to get the ratio correct. And once you start drinking maple syrup, man, like life is better for sure.
Ted King has entered the chat.
Yeah. Canadians are like, duh. So we're so happy and nice.
Seriously. How about you, Amber? Do you have one? I'm sure you've had to drink a lot of sponsored products and stuff over the years, but.
Yeah, actually. So the one that I really like is plain whey with lemon lime Gatorade powder, and it's cheap and easy, and it tastes like key lime pie. I really like that. But I will say that like there are a lot of awesome products on the market, and I've tried a whole bunch of them, and frankly, like I don't stress too much about the ratio. If I'm making it for myself, I use a 4-to-1 ratio. But if I'm sponsored and I'm getting a tasty recovery drink, by the way, I love the Cliff chocolate recovery.
It's just good. It tastes like a chocolate milkshake. It's good.
It's so good. But yeah, like as long as it's something that is palatable, it tastes good. The palatability is really important because again, consistency is key. So as long as it's something that you really enjoy and that's not going to be upsetting your system. And you can kind of think about recovery drinks like saddles. There are so many different ones out there that if the one that you're trying is giving you GI distress, try something else, because I guarantee there's something out there that's going to work for you, something that's going to taste good, it's going to sit well on your stomach, and it's going to make you feel great. So yeah, try a bunch of different stuff.
How about you, Nate?
I don't make my own. I prescribe my own. I talked on Instagram a little about the 4 quadrants of getting things done. In my role, I'm lucky that I have an assistant, and making a whole bunch of drinks would be one of those things where it is work and it feels like you're getting things done, but it's not the most impactful thing I can do. So I have prescribed stuff, and I have a little fridge that's right next to my bike that has recovery drinks and all my drinks ready for me. And that's a thing is like, I think you're more likely to drink your recovery drink if you have it ready before you're done working out. And it's just right there. So what I do is I have 100 grams of maltodextrin. I just bought on Amazon, which is super cheap. It's like $5 for 20 pounds or something like that. Or no, 10, I don't know. It's very inexpensive. Then I have 25 grams of Whey Optimum Nutrition, like a scoop. And then I put in a little bit extra, like bulk supplements, leucine, just to make sure I get enough leucine. This is very important. Your whey protein probably has enough leucine, but I was like, it's a little bit extra is not going to hurt. And then I usually throw in some other supplements that have aren't probably they're not as
where are we going with this?
No, not those kind of supplements. I'm talking about like it may or may not improve performance, but I'm just going to try it. Beta alanine, citrulline maltate. I'm not probably saying any of those ones right. I know they're supposed to be before workouts, but it's in here, and little creatine's in here too. And so that will then change based on the time of year. I have a separate bottle to get the beta alanine and citrulline maltate in before the workout, but I always forget to do it for some reason. And probably no harm doing it afterwards, and it's just making my pee expensive. But Yeah, so these are really cheap if you just make them yourself with that whey protein.
Do you add like chocolate or something to it, or is the protein chocolatey flavored? Is that why
the
it's
protein
brown?
is chocolatey flavored? On whey protein, there's like a bazillion flavors. So whatever you want, they will make.
Cool. And for those wondering, Nate, of course, on video, if you're joining us via audio, was showing his recovery drink there on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, with that out of the way, yes, indeed, it is a bottle. So with that out of the way, because I know that people would have been asking, well, what do you actually take in? Amber, we can probably continue on. Sorry for the interlude there, but
no. I think that's great. And I think an important note to make is it doesn't have to be a drink either. Drinks are easy to get down after a workout, especially a hard one. So that is kind of like a common way to doing it. But if there's just a particular snack that you like, that you look forward to, that tastes really good, it sits well in your stomach, really the important thing is getting that carbohydrate and protein into the system. And whether it's 4-to-1 or 3-to-1, it doesn't matter that much, honestly. But again, part of the reason for recommending this, that you do this after every workout, is the practicality of it. This is just as applicable for a morning workout as it is for an evening one, right? So like we were saying, you might not have 6 hours after an evening workout to eat carbohydrate and replenish your stores. But if you have a recovery shake right after that workout, boom, you've hit that insurance policy and you know you've got it. It also applies for double days. So it's a really flexible approach. It's something you can apply consistently, even in, differing changes in training schedule. It's a lot more practical than setting a timer to eat every 30 minutes after your workout for the rest of the day. And again, you're taking advantage of that window to kind of get that insurance and faster replenishment. It's also an easy way to up your protein intake over the course of the whole day, is getting that protein in your recovery shake. So if you're trying to hit some macro targets, this is a great way to bump up your protein intake on the whole. And on that note, it's really good to meet your overall energy demands, which, as we started this conversation by saying, is one of the two most important things for getting faster: the training stimulus and your total daily intake in terms of meeting your overall energy needs. And lastly, I didn't dig into the science on this per se, but we have so much anecdotal evidence on this that having a recovery shake at the end of your workout helps to stabilize appetite and mood in the many hours after your workout. And all of that goes to enhancing the consistency, not only of the consistency of your training. Because if you feel good in the hours after your workout, as opposed to just feeling completely destroyed, you're going to be so much more likely to get back on the bike again enthusiastically for your workout the next day. So I think that those are some important points to keep in mind.
Pete and I have mentioned this before. On long rides, we get done and Pete and I are like, oh my gosh, like what can we eat now? Like the fridge does not have enough food in it.
Give me everything, that, right? Give me everything.
Yeah. And it does work really well. Having that shake helps a lot. So that if you have that shake and then for some reason you have to wait until like the next meal, anything else like that, it just stops you from grabbing the junky food that's going to fill some sort of a needless void in that moment, when really you could have that and then feed with more nutritious food once it's ready, something like that. So it's a huge health tip as well, for sure.
Totally. And speaking of health, I have one more point to make on this, which is that immune function is another piece of this puzzle. So as it happens, if you get sick less often, you're probably going to make more gains, right? Because Jonathan, you just experienced this. Getting sick really sets you back. And if you can just avoid getting sick or get sick less frequently, that's a huge bonus in terms of performance and getting faster. Not only and not to mention that it's just a nicer way of going about your life. Carbohydrate intake during exercise is immunoprotective. It decreases muscle protein breakdown and it decreases cytokine production, which enhances your inflammatory recovery in the hours afterwards. Protein and carbohydrate together post-exercise decrease cortisol, which is also immunoprotective. And carbohydrate in particular post-exercise may help restore the immune system after high intensity or strenuous exercise. And in this case, high intensity was defined as basically anything sweet spot or higher. So if you're doing interval work on the trainer, that's high intensity work. And having carbohydrate during and after and some protein after is immunoprotective. So this is a good thing, not only for performance, but the authors are quick to point out that this is particularly relevant right now since we're in the middle of a global pandemic. So yet another thing to consider in terms of the benefits of carbohydrate during and after training.
So that's like a ton of solid science-based evidence that leads us toward why we want to take in carbs during our workouts and after our workouts, and that doing one or the other doesn't cancel out the other one. And this probably, so with all that justification in place, it brings us back to the point of finding that minimum effective dose with carbohydrate and our addiction to doing that. Now, hopefully with all of that, you can see how silly it is to do that. It's like you're just trying to run a razor's edge that really has but like the asymmetric risk, it's pretty obvious to see. Nate, do you want to cover some of that? Because I know this is something that
grinds my gears.
Yes, it grinds your gears, exactly. And actually, somebody for what it's worth, somebody's in the YouTube chat thanking Nate right now because they responded to Nate's call to take in more carbohydrate when you're training in a recent podcast. He mentioned that now he can take in 80 grams of carbs and he feels amazing when he trains. So it's cool.
Anyone faster.
Thanks for. Yes. So thanks for joining us in the YouTube chat. You can do that every week. But then on top of that, it does work. So let's talk about it, Nate.
Yeah. And so I think over time, there has been different trends in fitness and in health that are usually brought on by usually books or something. And what they talk about is they describe a single mechanism or a mechanism inside the body. And because the mechanism works that way, they extrapolate a result. And in general, in science, if you find that you can measure the result, so like weight loss, body composition, fitness, and it does not match up with the mechanism, that means there is probably something else that's going on that we're not aware of yet. To Amber's point earlier, it's very hard to figure this stuff out. Like we're probably gonna get to Mars before we figure out everything that's in our bodies. Like I'm positive about that, which is insane to think. So if the mechanism doesn't match out with the outcome,
True.
Don't say the outcome is wrong. Say we don't know enough about the human body to understand it. And outcome is fantastic, but mechanism is also fantastic too, because once you understand more mechanisms, you can design more studies, do more research that are more targeted and more insightful. And then you can kind of validate these things. Like, all the recent vaccine stuff, there's been the mRNA advances that's all done based on how we know the body works. And that has then helped us develop a more effective vaccine for COVID, apparently. Like I say apparently because it's the efficacy, and this is scientific talk, right?
Allegedly, yep.
Not allegedly. That's the wrong word. But it's based on the data we have, it's 90+% effective, right? So the two ones with mRNA. But just in general, I think people will argue, they say, hey, that outcome is impossible because of this mechanism. And we're like, but we've measured the outcome. Like attack that the outcome was not measured correctly. Don't say the outcome is impossible because of this mechanism. I hope that makes sense to everybody. And oftentimes people will try to say that the outcome is wrong by throwing really they'll do like the Krebs cycle and be like, because of the Krebs cycle, blah, blah, blah. And it's very complex. And everyone else is like, well, I can't argue against that because that person sounds like they've read a lot of books. But you can just kind of, do some gravity tests. Gravity is a great example. Well, then we'll learn more. So we've observed Newtonian physics for many, many years. And then as we get into other observations, we're like, when we get down to like electrons, they don't behave the same way. And we have to come with a whole nother explanation. Our old explanation of how we thought it was is wrong. And this will continually happen inside of training and nutrition. And that's just the process of science. So expect that and be proud of that. Don't say that that's what you want out of it. I'm kind of rambling here, but Amber, why don't you say something intelligent? Because I think you've got a tweet to read.
We need to hear from Pete. We need to bounce this back to Pete.
No, what Nate is really saying is it's my favorite thing. And I say it all the time is nutrition. We don't understand enough, so it's always going to change. What we know now doesn't necessarily hold true. It didn't hold true in the past, and it doesn't necessarily hold true in the future. But one of my favorite things about this topic specifically is when, in my experience with other athletes, cyclists, and other sports, if you aren't someone who religiously takes a recovery meal, beverage, whatever, I guarantee that changing that one single thing will have such a monstrous change in the way that you feel and are able to do what you set out to do. It feels like something, there's another force in the universe that's helping you get through your workouts.
So true.
It's mind blowing. And so if you're one of the people who feel like I'm not working out enough to deserve this, there's no deserve. You're doing something and put something back in your body so that you're capable of doing it again the next time. And I've seen this across brand new cyclists. I've seen it across very experienced cyclists. For some reason, they just don't think they deserve, is usually the word I hear, recovery. And once that changes, some of the fastest people I know got even faster. Some of the people who I knew were not making the gains they thought they could make, as soon as they changed that, they've transformed into a different type of an athlete. And it's because you are just fueling and then signaling. Those are the two things that this kind of all goes back to. If you fuel your day, if you fuel your workout, and you recover with something that signals your body to like reap the rewards of the work you just did, that's it. That's all we did. And it was a lot to do that. But once you change your body to kind of accept all that, you turn into a completely different athlete. And I think that's what's crazy about all this.
You've just triggered Amber. Whenever you say, I don't deserve this, like, I think that's a trigger for Amber, right?
Yeah, big time. Big time. Don't do that to yourself.
It's still true, right? Yeah. I think we can fix that. Like, you've done something and you have to put it back in your body to change your body to be more ready for more work and to be stronger the next time. That's all you're doing.
Yeah. Give your body what it needs to do what you're asking of it. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. And we get out of our own body's way, right? Like just let it have what it needs.
Our bodies are amazing and we hold them, like we ask so much of them and we take them for granted. And then, we act like taking in food is something that has to be earned. I mean, your body keeps you alive every single day. It's kept you alive your whole freaking life. I mean, your body makes it so you don't have to think about contracting your heart muscle every time you need to. I mean, just that one thing alone is pretty astonishing. And then you start to dig into it a little bit deeper and it's just mind blowing, and your body's amazing and it deserves nourishment. So just, let's not be silly about this.
We should probably end this question here with this is actually a series of tweets by Inigo San Milan. He's a sports researcher who was also he was a pro cyclist as well. And Amber, you put this tweet in here. Do you want to read it? Because I think that it's good, because a lot of we see studies that apply to sedentary people when they're talking about, the standard American diet, and we see all this stuff. And a lot of the time we extrapolate it across to us athletes. And we assume that everybody above us is doing something that is involving more deprivation, more something else, and they're just somehow managing to make it work. I like this tweet for that reason. Do you want to read that, Amber?
Yeah. So to follow on what you said, I think a lot of people who are listening to this, you're exercising regularly. You might even be working out every single day, and you might still feel reluctant to refer to yourself as an athlete. So when we talk about athletes, you might kind of automatically count yourself out of this group that we're referring to. But again, like I said, this is about, healthy exercising adults. So if you're a healthy exercising adult, you, by our definition, are an athlete. And I think that because people tend to see themselves as, average, then when they read studies or read articles that are talking about kind of the average sedentary lifestyle, they lump themselves into that category because it feels a little bit too arrogant to call yourself an athlete and exceptional from that group. But the truth is, if you're exercising regularly, you're not living a sedentary lifestyle. So a lot of these things don't actually apply to you, again, in the absence of metabolic disorder. So these tweets by Inigo San Milan, I thought were really, really wonderful. So this was in context with a Twitter thread that he initiated by lamenting, just missing these chocolate paninis that he used to have as a kid. And he said, let's see, I'll read there's two from October 20th and then there's one from December 1st. So the two from October 20th go like this. Processed carbohydrate are probably not good, but in my modest opinion, lack of physical activity, or very little, is the primary problem. Elite athletes have the highest carbohydrate diet, including processed carbohydrate, and yet don't have obesity, acquired type 2 diabetes, or cardiovascular disease. Their mitochondria are amazing. He also says, all I'm trying to say is that carbohydrates and wonderful chocolate are not responsible for the obesity epidemic. In my opinion, and that's him speaking, sedentarism is the primary problem causing mitochondrial dysfunction and inability to oxidize carbohydrate properly. The secondary problem comes from adding carbohydrate when it can't be metabolized. So if you're training regularly, your body needs this fuel, and it's for all the reasons we just outlined, it's going to be a good thing. And then the third tweet he has is on December 1st. He says, there's no evidence that carbohydrate restriction works in terms of athletic performance. We were doing it already over 30 years ago when I raced. In fact, I've never seen an athlete be successful restricting carbohydrate. In fact, I've seen too many careers destroyed by it, and I'm tired of this. We must end this trend. And I think, again, there are so many reasons that carbohydrate gets vilified in mainstream internet feeds, but it's really, really important to examine the context around those claims and really think about how that context applies to you as an individual.
We just solved the carb debate right there. Gavel struck. It's done. I'm sure the internet will all agree. So that was awesome. Thank you, Amber, for going over all of that. To recap, carbohydrate intake is what your body needs, and in particular because you're an athlete. Give yourself credit for that hard work that you do. You are an athlete, so you are not an average person.
I want to say just one more comment on that. You might say, hey, I'm 2 to 2.5 watts per kilo. You know, I'm not these huge numbers. You, compared to the average American, my goodness, have you seen the average American? Like, there's other countries too. I'm looking at you, UK and Australia. All of us, like, we're not very, the average person, you are at such different, you're on Mars, right? Compared to the average person. Yes. So you should be so proud of yourself, and that you are, and you should not lump yourself in to the person that you see at Walmart, right? Right. They're completely different people.
Hey, I shop at Walmart.
Same.
I do too, but the average American.
We know what you mean, though. Yeah, we know what you mean.
I'm just saying that's a great place to see some Americans is at Walmart, because Americans go to Walmart.
Sure, indeed. Yeah, so give yourself credit. Taking in carbohydrate during your workout doesn't mean you don't need it after. Taking it in after doesn't mean you don't need it during. Taking it in before doesn't mean you don't need it during. It all has a point and a purpose, and it all has its own unique advantages depending on the different states that you're in. So let's eat carbs and get fast.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.
If you think I have better hair than Jonathan, give it a thumbs up. If not, leave a comment.
My hair is better than his.